Before we get started, I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so that you don't miss any of the content that is released by Go Collect. And if you're interested, head over to Regie Collects here on YouTube. It's Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for the Go Collect speculation video. Stay tuned. Regie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector and the host of the Go Collect speculation video. And I want to welcome you to another episode. In this video, we are going to spend some time looking at 6 blog posts that have been posted to the Go Collect website. And I can honestly tell you that this is going to be a solid video. These 6 blog posts are really well done. There are a lot of people across this country that are sheltering in place, and I can tell you that these folks are using their time wisely because they are doing a lot of research in order to put these blog posts together. And I definitely want to encourage you to take some time to read these blog posts in their entirety because I really don't think that you're going to regret it. This first blog post takes a look at several different late printing comics that you may be interested in. One of the things that makes late printing, so second, third, fourth type of printings, really interesting is that they tend to have very small print runs. As the print runs are done, they tend to get smaller and smaller over time based upon what retailers are ordering, based upon demand, etc., etc. So this blog post actually takes a look at several different books that actually have some pretty small print runs, which means that there is the potential for these books to go up in value, especially if there's something significant that happens in them. And in many cases, there is something that actually happens in these books that makes them noteworthy. The very first book that the blogger talks about is Daredevil number 610, and this is actually the second printing of this particular book. Now, this comic actually is the first appearance of a new villain called Vigil. And Vigil turns out to be a figment of Matt Murdock's imagination, but it is a character that actually captured the imagination of several readers. And what's really cool here is that Vigil actually appears on the cover of the second printing, which makes it a pretty desirable book, especially because, as the blogger points out, this book has an extremely small print run of only 624 copies. The next book that the blogger talks about is Captain Marvel number 8. And this book is actually significant because it's the first appearance of a character known as Star. The first print run was around 30,000 copies, and Marvel actually did some additional work and put out a second printing because there was a lot of demand for this book. And the second print run was actually about 20,000 copies. Now, what's interesting is that as Marvel moved into the third printing, which is the one that the blogger really wants people to focus on, the third printing had a really small print run of about 3,100 copies. So again, if you're interested in small print runs, if you're interested in Star, this could potentially be a book that you want to take a look at. The blogger goes on to talk about 2 additional books that are both related to Miss Marvel. And he specifically first talks about Miss Marvel number 9, the second printing. And with this book, it was actually the introduction of a new villain by the name of Storm Ranger. And what's really cool about the second printing is that Storm Ranger actually appears on the cover of this particular book, which happened to have a print run of only about 1,700 copies. The blogger also talks about Miss Marvel number 5, the second printing specifically. Now, with this book, it is actually the first appearance of a suit that ultimately becomes the possession of Storm Rangers. This particular book, that being Miss Marvel number 5, the second printing, had a print run of about 2,900 copies. There are definitely some opportunities that exist with small print runs, especially potentially those related to these late printings like the second and third print. And so if this is something that you're interested in, you definitely want to take a look at this blog post because I only cited a couple of books that the blogger talks about. So you definitely want to check out the very last one that they mentioned, and it's probably my favorite out of all of them. This next blog post, entitled Golden Age Classic at a Bronze Price, actually prompted me to go to eBay. And I went to eBay because I had to buy the book that was actually mentioned in this blog post. And I did it for several reasons. First, I am a huge fan of the Invaders. I am a huge fan of the Human Torch, that being the original Human Torch. And I am also a fan of Alex Schomburg's. And the truth is that I may never own a Golden Age Schomburg comic, but I can certainly afford a Bronze Age version. And to be honest, I did not know that he actually did the cover to this particular book. The book we're talking about is Invaders Annual #1. And this is an annual that was actually created in 1976 by Alex Schomburg and a group of comic book artists from the Golden Age. It was actually written by Roy Thomas. Alex Schomburg actually did the cover art, and I believe he actually did the second story in this book focused on the Golden Age Human Torch. Norman, who is one of my favorite Go Collect bloggers, actually took some time to do some additional research on this book, and he specifically looked at the returns at several different grades. He specifically looked at a 9.8, which had a last sale at $325. Now, this book only has a census count of 287 copies, and it has a positive sales trend at about 12%. At a 9.6, this book will set you back about $83 and has a sales trend that is positive at 11.2%. At an 8.5, this book will only set you back $25, but has a massive return at about 85%. If you are a fan of Alex Schomburg or the Invaders like I am, you definitely want to take a look at this book, and you might also want to read this blog post. The link to it is down in the description. When I say the name Moebius, I'm curious what comes to mind. For a lot of people, the name Moebius doesn't really mean much. If you're from France, then you will certainly appreciate that name because Moebius is an extremely talented French artist. If you're a fan of the Silver Surfer, you may recognize the name because he did the cover and the interior art for the Stan Lee Silver Surfer Parable 2-issue book that was done back in the 80s. And this is widely recognized as one of the better Silver Surfer titles that is out there. But outside of those two spheres, if you will, a lot of people don't really know the name Moebius. But I will tell you that this guy is extremely talented. He is, again, extremely well known outside of the United States by and large. But in this blog post that is posted to the Go Collect website, this blogger actually takes some time to look at the values or lack thereof associated with the covers that Moebius has actually done for Marvel, DC, and also Vertigo. And I allude to the fact that there's some values that are unknown because in many cases, these books have not been graded and have not been sent in to CGC and CBCS, and therefore there isn't enough data for us to really even have an FMV associated with it. But let me tell you, Moebius is a talented guy, and this may be a blog post that you want to take a look at. If you're really into undervalued books, this blog post highlights several that you may be interested in. The blogger points out that Moebius actually worked on 2 covers for DC in the 80s, and those 2 books were Hardware issue number 49 and Static issue number 45. And what he points out is that Static issue 45 has an FMV of $325 for a 9.8. Now, if you contrast that to hardware number 49, there just aren't enough in the database for Go Collect to actually derive an FMV. And he kind of highlights and speculates here that people recognize that Moebius was the cover artist for Static 45, but people may not recognize that he also worked on hardware issue number 49, which is why there aren't a lot of those out there that are graded and being sold on the open market. Now, the same can be said for a book that Moebius actually did for Marvel, specifically Marvel Tales issue number 253. This was an anthology book that unfortunately also does not have an FMV because there just isn't enough data in the registry or in the databases for an FMV to actually be determined. The blog post makes the point that there are a lot of Moebius books that don't have FMVs, but it does highlight that there are two instances where Moebius's work is well known and also commands some decent dollars. Specifically, what is called out here is Spider-Man number 800. There was a virgin variant of this book, a book that I could not find in the wild, I'll tell you that. But at a 9.8, the FMV of this book is $120. Now, if you take a look at Wolverine, specifically the return of Wolverine number 2, you can see the true impact of Moebius, specifically when you look at a 9.8 of this book. It commands a price of $575. So if you're interested in obscure French artists, Moebius could be your guy. And to be honest with you, at some point in the future, when his artwork is truly recognized and truly appreciated, there could be some great opportunities here, especially because so many of the books that he actually worked on can actually be found in dollar bins. I actually picked up the Silver Surfer issue number 1 and 2 that he did with Stan Lee for just a couple of bucks at an antique store just last year. So just before recording this video, I spent some time watching a 20-minute video on YouTube in which another YouTuber essentially made an argument as to why Peter Quill's mother from Guardians of the Galaxy may actually be Eternity. And I had to watch this video for myself because this blogger basically makes the case that Eternity is actually already in the MCU. And as a result of that, folks may actually want to try to take a look at picking up her first appearance. And Eternity's first appearance is Strange Tales issue number 138. This is actually a pretty cool book that will set you back more than $1,000 if you're looking at anything at a 9.2 or higher. But if you're willing to go slightly lower than that, you can actually pick up an 8.5 to an 8.0 for under $250, and you can even pick up a 7.0 for close to $100. While I don't know if all the rumors are true about Star-Lord's mom being Eternity and that she's actually already been in the movie, I don't know whether that is true or not, but I will tell you that this book is a pretty solid book that I actually have in my collection. I do believe that there are going to be more appearances of cosmic characters in the MCU, especially as we start to get into the Eternals landscape. I think that there could be some appearances, and so this could be a book that you want to check out. The link to this blog post is down in the description. In this next blog post, Mike W. asks the question of who will be the next Wolverine. And he spends a little bit of time taking a look at some actors out there that could potentially be the next Wolverine. Because I think the writing is pretty clear, right? That Hugh Jackman will never reprise the role of Wolverine. And so Mike W. takes a shot on goal. So if you are a fan of the Star Wars trilogy, Pacific Rim, The Kingsman, or even Game of Thrones, you may want to take a look at this blog post and see if you agree with Mike W.'s predictions. So this next blog post is really interesting to me, and it's interesting for several different reasons. This one is entitled Acclaim's Maximum Carnage #1. And from the title, you already know two things. You know that it is associated with video games, and you know that it's associated with Carnage. And anything Carnage related right now is extremely hot. And so this one is interesting because we're talking about a reprint that was essentially a free promotional item that was given away with the purchase of the Maximum Carnage game back in the day. And like many of you, I may have received some of these free promotional things in the past and just kind of chucked them or not treated them well. And that's probably why this particular book is commanding such high sales prices right now. So there are only, according to the blogger, there are only 69 graded copies of Maximum Carnage #1 on the CGC census. This book is actually a reprint of Spider-Man Ultimate #1. Now, with 69 copies on the CGC registry, they point out that 6 of these copies are signed. The remainder are actually universal grade or blue label. Now, what's really interesting is that there are only 6 that are 9.8. One of these books sold many years ago for around $250. But just this year alone, 2 copies of this book at a 9.8 have actually exchanged hands. On January of this year, one sold for $3,524. A second copy on March 29th was sold at a 9.8 for $4,000. If you are sitting on any of these, congrats. That is all that I can say to you. Congrats. If you picked it up for $250 back in the day, congrats to you as well, because this is really astounding to me. The blogger goes on to actually talk about some other grades of the book, the 9.6 and the 9.4. In both cases, the book actually still commands a healthy FMV. So if you're interested in these promotional comics, if you think you may have one of these books in your collection, you definitely want to take a look at this blog post. The link to it is down in the description. So there you have it. We have reached the end of another week. 6 additional blog posts have been recorded and discussed. And as I mentioned, these blog posts are really solid. So I definitely want to encourage you to take the time to check them out. Visit the Go Collect website and see all of the other blog posts that are there as well, if you have a couple of minutes, that is. And my hope is that you enjoyed this video and will tune in next week, next Wednesday, when we get to do this all over again.